Well, let's begin in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Almighty God, we come for you this day. Grateful for the opportunity to discuss Native ministry and the way that we can journey together with our brothers of the First Nations here in the Western Hemisphere. We ask you to guide our discussion as always. And as always, we ask for special blessings for all those who we minister to, all those who we journey with, all those near and dear to us, our friends and relations, and for all those tribal communities throughout this Western Hemisphere. We ask that you please be with them, help them, bring them healing and many blessings. And we pray all these things in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Today, for this month, we are talking about native languages. Native language preservation is a very important topic. Unfortunately, one of the many downsides to the boarding slash residential school system was the eradication of native languages. At one point, most people coming from tribal communities would have had very little, if any, English at all. And unfortunately, I'd say by the 1960s to 1970s, that demographic was changing to where slowly the percentages of those who had some English to those who had none of their tribal language started to become skewed. And so by the 1970s, language preservation became a very important topic. Certainly in the cultural revitalization efforts that came about starting in 1968 with the Alcatraz occupation, and then going later up into the 70s and 80s with a lot of the political protest movements and things like that, that the efforts to reclaim cultural identity certainly has sparked a renewed effort in language preservation. But still, the simple fact of the matter is there are fewer and fewer people who speak any of their native language. And of those who speak it somewhat fluently or fluently, that number is greatly reduced as well. And sadly, there are many tribes in the United States and Canada in which they have no fluent language speakers left. So we're talking today with a really great guy who I very much admire, a friend and even a mentor of mine. His name is Seto Watts. Seto Watts is his preferred, that's what he prefers to go by. It is his Cheyenne name. He's a member of the Northern Cheyenne Nation. He will clarify this, and so just to qualify some terms that you're going to hear in his interview, he talks about Sutta and Natsitsa or Tsitsistas. And what he's talking about is the fact that long ago, there was a band of natives called the Sutta people in Canada. And then they happened to join forces with the Tsitsistas people, or what we know as the Cheyenne people. And the two of them became merged to such a point to where by now there's barely any distinction between the two. The Northern Cheyennes are primarily Sutta, not Tsitsistas, or Sutta and Cheyenne, or Northern Cheyenne people. Down in Oklahoma, the Southern Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes of Oklahoma, they would be more primarily Tsitsistas, which is purely Cheyenne. Whereas in Montana, the Northern Cheyenne, there's a lot of the Sutta influence still there, including in their language. So Seto Watts identifies himself as a Sutta person, a Northern Cheyenne person, but of the Sutta band. Seto Watts in English translates to appears, but his, as he calls it, his BIA name, his Bureau of Indian Affairs name is Burt Medicine Bull. Burt Medicine Bull is a professor of Cheyenne language and Cheyenne history at Chief Dull-Knife College, one of the several tribal colleges in the United States. He's done a lot of good work. He's a highly sought after speaker. You'll hear him at some point refer to people at Yellowstone, asking him to come out to Yellowstone National Park to talk. Highly sought after speaker, very knowledgeable about his ways. Really good guy. And I think that comes across in his interview. And he is one of what he says is just over 300 fluent Cheyenne speakers in Montana on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation left. That's 300 down over the past, 20 years, significantly from a much higher number. Back 20 something years ago, or 25, 30 years ago, when I first started going to that reservation, you heard people talking Cheyenne all the time. And it was If you were 40 years old or older, you knew the language, even if you didn't know it fluently. Now, yeah, 40, 50-year-olds, they know a few bits and pieces, some phrases. Some know it more fluently than that, but fluent speakers, yeah, they're older. They're getting older and they're dying off, and a lot of them died because of COVID. So with us this month is Seto Watts, or Professor Burt Medicine Bull of the Northern Cheyenne Nation in Montana.
I wanted to talk first of all about language preservation. I know that's something that's very near and dear to your heart, something that you're involved with there with the Sutta, not Sitistas people there at Chief Del Knife College, and kind of wanted to get some of your ideas about the importance of language preservation, some of the things that maybe that you're doing to help recover the language.
Well, right now, there's a lot of young people who are looking everywhere but learning the language. And you can see it by the way they dress. And so a lot of them, their grandparents have passed on. And so their parents never were taught the language because of the negative treatment that their grandparents or maybe even their great-grandparents got through the parochial schools and the BIA boarding schools. They wanted to assimilate the Cheyenne people and make them forget the language and the culture. And they pretty much succeeded in doing that because there's only 300 some fluent speakers left. And the rest, they hear language here and there and understand it, but they're not fluent speakers. They don't even think in Cheyenne language. And when I say Cheyenne language, I'm talking about Chichistasa and Sutta languages, and they're mixed together now. They used to be separate, but now they're melded together. So, and it's up to the young people to, I say, reclaim the language because it was severed from them. It wasn't their fault, but it was severed from them, like I just mentioned, the parochial school systems and the BIA boarding schools. And they pretty much succeeded in doing that. So there was kind of a standstill of learning the language. So today, a lot of the young people, even younger than me, even in high school age, college age, and parents of those high school students and college students, they're in I would call a mode, an anger mode. And you can see that. I look at these young people, some of them my age, and they've got this angry expression. And I know what it is, and that's because they don't know the language. They're missing out. They miss out on, first of all, they miss out on how to express themselves in the language. A true heartfelt expression. They're missing out on that. They're missing out on expressing a prayer in the language. We have a long ways to go to people say, we need to revitalize the language. And I say, no, we need to reclaim the language.
How can you do that? Because it seems to me that like you can only get so far with learning phrases. It seems like the best way to learn the language is to be using it.
Exactly.
And if people aren't using it on a regular basis, how can it come back?
Well, that's why I'm teaching it the way I am. It's conversational language. You know, you got to know your name first. You got to greet each other and ask each other where you're from. Well, people know where you're from, but they don't know the English or the Cheyenne name for their village. A lot of people don't know that. Even today, this summer, I had a group of students, and they said, "Oh, I never knew that name there was that Black Lodge people, or Busby, So I only get 45 classroom time. That's 45 hours and that's not much. You have to have at least 2-3 years of daily language to, and from what I hear from you asking is how are we going to save this language? Well, we really need to have an immersion school type setup where they're talking it daily, almost 6 hours a day, every day, even through the weekend. And who's got that kind of dedication? I do, but who's got that kind of pay? No one can pay that. And I've got 2 presentations to do, one on the 20th, and then the following week in Yellowstone Park. I'll be there for 3 days. So I know they want to hear about the Cheyenne language and they want to hear about the creation story and all that. A lot of the Cheyenne language learners need to know that. They need to know where they're coming from, their background, their cultural background. And you have to know that. Otherwise, why are you trying to learn the language? You have to have that background information in your history. Yep.
I don't know if you were paying attention to the news, but up in Canada, the Pope is there with First Nations people. And part of the reason for him being there is to apologize for the abuse that was committed by the church and boarding schools. And I was wondering about this because I was thinking a lot of the problem, like you said yourself, with BIA schools and church schools and all that was the taking away the language. So people talk about reparation, and it seems to me like, well, you can't put a monetary value on the hurt that you cause people, but you can try to do things to maybe overcome some of the negative things. So maybe if I know that in certain places they have a language curriculum, they're working on making language a part of the curriculum. They have cultural elements in the school. What do you and you were saying before, like, well, who can help pay for these things? Who can help pay for these language immersion clinics and things like that? Do you think, or what do you think, I guess maybe, would be, what do you think, that at least as far as like as a Catholic priest myself, what do you think the church's response should be in order to help language preservation, especially since we played such a significant role in taking it away?
Oh. I've never really thought about that. And like you said, just giving money to the tribe isn't going to do it. We have to come up with teaching these class 7 teachers that have the class 7 certification to teach language. They need to learn how to be teachers and learn how to do lesson planning. They need to learn how to do assessment. They need to learn how to do what we call scope and sequence. There's no scope and sequence in the language, but it can happen because you can start with readings and your names, and most people like to eat, so start with eating sentences, I'm hungry, are you hungry, things like that. Exactly, those things like that. Yeah, that's and then there's animate and animate phrases in those. Like for instance,
Huh. Churches. Kentucky
chicken.
Fried. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cojeas.
And so, or beans is an animate phrase. Because they're plural. So they need to learn that. See, even though they're fluent speakers, that doesn't make them good teachers. I see that. They don't know what to teach. They're just teaching whatever comes to their mind. So I've been asked to come up with a program for the Lamner High School. And so that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to have them teach their names. I'm going to have them teach greetings, like just what we did in Cheyenne 1. All the greetings and where are you from? They can say where they're from.
Well, what do you think about the identity of a Sutta person or a Cheyenne person, and its link, its role, its connection with language? Do you believe that language has a role to play in a person's identity as who they are?
Oh yeah, quite a bit. It plays a major role, 100% role in how they feel about themselves as Sutta or Chichis person. Especially when they say their name, Sitwa is Natsista or Nasutta or both. And that has a lot to do with how they feel about themselves overall. If they have confidence in themselves, or if they have hope, or if they're positive, all those things play a major role in their lives if they know the language. And I know that a lot of them, they lack a lot of that because they don't know the language. And sometimes when I'm talking Cheyenne language, I see that a lot of them just look at me like, I wish I could understand what he's saying, I see that. Some people get mad because they get mad at their parents or grandparents because they never taught them the language. And I always tell them, come to my class, I'll teach you.
Do you think maybe they feel less Cheyenne because they don't know the language?
Maybe not less Cheyenne, but no pride, no self-identity. And that has a lot to do with it if you don't know the language.
Yeah.
And I tell them if you can at least say good morning or good night and good to see you and good to see you and different things like that, real simple conversation, daily language. That's daily language there. If you can at least say that, that makes you really proud of who you are.
The connection.
Yeah, exactly. You're not outside the circle anymore. You're within the circle.
Can you maybe say real quickly about the importance of praying in the Cheyenne language?
You express yourself more from your heart when you pray in the language. Because you know exactly what you're feeling, so you say that. And that loses its real meaning when you switch to English. My grandpa said, Mahaya has many languages. Mahaya, we pray to Mahaya in a lot of different churches. You can tell by the teepee poles, he says. Each teepee pole represents the different way of praying, he would say. And each teepee pole represents each family's beliefs. That we all pray and they all go up and they're all together, tied together up there with a rope. That's where Mahaya is at.
Well, I would think we're gonna get cut off, so let me just say, Niamachia
Yeah.
ish na wissen na stachos evons.
Dump right in here. That was a fabulous and wonderful video. There's been a concern at the subcommittee for a long time, ever since I got into the office, about languages and how it relates to culture and the ways, especially the Catholic schools on reservations, are those who cater to Native American population, how they respond to language. The schools that I go to on reservations, they always make a very point of saying not only they're going to talk about culture, but also talk about language in all the grades. So that's very good in terms of looking at the damage done by schools, including Catholic schools, earlier on when they tried to wipe out the language. So good, it's kind of to embrace language, and then it's to continue that. But my question is, how do we really counter the damage done by schools in the past, those who saw the native languages as an obstacle to not only Christianity, but also to their way of life, which is incredibly destructive. I know some of it is, again, addressing culture and language in our Catholic school systems. But what do you think, Father David, about how do we redo or how we undo the damage done by the Catholic schools?
My opinion, and this is something he and I have discussed, and he'll say this too, he'll be the first person to say it. Language preservation doesn't work unless people are using the language about 5 to 6 hours a day. And he said that himself. That's his estimate. It has to be a total immersion type of environment, because just learning a few phrases, all you're doing is memorizing. But when you're actually having to use the language, your mind is working, communicating, expressing itself in that way. That's how you become more fluid in the language. What he does in his class, and I've taken his classes, by the way, I'm one of his students. I've studied through Chief Dunlap College, Cheyenne Language 1 and Cheyenne Language 2. So he goes about a process through his classes of teaching basic phrases that you use in everyday life. For example, first thing in the morning, pivot buonat. Pivot buonat means good morning. The root of that is pivot, which in Northern Cheyenne is what they say is good. In Oklahoma, their dialect, they say pava, a slower, elongated pava, whereas in Northern Cheyenne, they say pivot. It's the same word, it means good. So pivot buonat. So you learn these basic things about the language, but they're common phrases. Or I'll say, nakaniotse, or nekaniotse, are you hungry? Things like that, things that you use in your everyday language. What's your name? Where are you from? And things like that. And he integrates a lot of the culture and the history in there. And if we had a lot more time, I could give you an endless number of examples. But bottom line is, he teaches phrases that you can use every day. And then beyond that, he will be the very first person to say, without it being a language immersion, a total immersion environment, it's never going to become fluent. You have to have 4, 5, 6 hours a day in which you can do it. Now, having said that, and this is where the church can come in, and I highly recommend and hope and I sincerely do pray that we will start to do this. In Ireland, my mother's family, a couple generations back, are Irish. I lived in Ireland off and on for 10 years. And in Ireland, back about almost about 70 years ago, around the 1950s, the Gaelic language was only spoken fluently in certain rural areas of Ireland. But the common, most people didn't speak it. If they spoke it at all, they didn't speak it very much. They would have a few words that they would know. But once the Irish government became the Republic of Ireland, and they became completely separated from the United Kingdom, one of the first things they did was they undertook a massive initiative to preserve the language. And so one of the first things they did was they put it in the school system to where it's a part of the curriculum, to where now, in order to get what you call your leaving cert or your diploma, you have to demonstrate proficiency in several fields of study, including the Gaelic language. And so even if you only know how to ask how to go to the bathroom, you at least know that much. So I think for native languages, so the consequence of that, though, is that within 50 to 60 years, The language is much stronger. There are entire villages in Ireland that have, from the Republic of Ireland government, protected status, is what they call Gaeltacht status. Gaeltacht is a Gaelic house basically, but it's Gaelic houses that whole villages that's the primary language. They don't speak it. They know how to, but they prefer not to, and they get like a protected status because of that. So as a result, like Irish language is very strong. It's on radio, it's on TV, it's in print media. They very much declared we are a bilingual country, and because of that, Gaelic preservation has successfully brought it back from the brink of extinction to where it's very prevalent now. There are schools, and this goes back to the answer to your question, called Gael schools, in which the 100% of the curriculum, 100%, everything that is said, even during recess or on breaks, 100% of the curriculum is taught in Gaelic. And you have the option of sending your children there, and every single word that comes out of their mouth from the time they get there to the time they go home will be Gaelic. And as a result, it has really started to take off. The fluidity and the proficiency of the Gaelic language is so much stronger now than it was in the 1940s, 1950s, as a direct result of the concerted effort of the Irish government. I think for Native nations as sovereign nations and the Catholic Church regarding our Catholic schools on reservations, we have to get really serious about language preservation. And that means implementing total immersions, completely integrated experiences where you can get as much or all of your curriculum taught to you in your language, starting from kindergarten and going up to grades. I know in Red Cloud they're talking about that. They do have language taught in certain lower level grades, but it's not completely K through 12 total immersive yet. But I think they're trying to get to the point where they can offer that. So your curriculum would be that class would be a segregated class, and then all of their studies, all their curriculum would be taught in the Lakota language. I personally believe, and I think Professor Medicine Bull believes the same thing. Total integration is the only way to bring languages back.
Like I talked to Will Newkirk about the importance of getting a language in schools, because the connection between language and culture from the Catholic Indian Schools Network. Because we know from studies, and there's been a lot of studies to talk about when kids our students are totally wrapped up in their culture and grounded in their culture, they do better in school and do better in life. It's just the kids who have one foot in two cultures not very strong, they become a lot more susceptible to depression and stuff like that. So again, the importance of focusing on language as being a central part of understanding culture is really important, especially for children.
There's also a lot of studies that show the benefit of children being bilingual, of any language. You know, the ability to learn a second language as a child. They say that if as a child you learn two languages, it's easier for you to learn languages later in life. So either way, it benefits the educational experience all the way around, in addition to the cultural preservation. But I think for us as the church, in as much as we were so heavily concentrated on eradicating the language or rooting it out, I think we need to put as much effort now into preserving it and implementing total language immersive. I mean, it starts with clinics, total language immersion clinics, where you go away for the weekend and you try to only use the words from your language, and they work with you, they help you with that. But then if you start at an early age, while there still are fluent language speakers that can integrate that into the curriculum, it can be done. I mean, Ireland did it, and other countries, other places have done it. But it just takes Seto Vox in his interview, when we were talking about, I was talking to him, he asked the question, he said, who has the time to do that? He said, I do, but who has the money? Well, all right, there's your answer. Supporting, making that in the Catholic Indian Schools Network, making that as much of a priority as necessary to be deemed worthy of the investment of the finances necessary to do that, I think needs to be impressed upon those who make those decisions on how the curriculum is taught in those schools. Like I know certain schools I've been to, native schools I've been to, where you'll have a quote unquote language class. again, no, it's like 1 hour a day, and you're just memorizing phrases. And if you're not using them at home, then you memorize them long enough to pass a test, and then you forget them.
Yeah, well, we talked a lot about the importance of preserving language and how it relates to culture and how it benefits students and also benefits society. Let's talk about the opposite. What's the consequences for losing language for native languages to be lost? Because a lot of languages, I think most languages at one time were taught are now lost. There are only a handful or even no speakers. They're just gone through history.
Yeah, I like that question. I'm glad you asked it. I did actually ask him that during the interview. I said, about the link between language and identity, and of course he was very adamant that there's a definite link between language and identity. Who you are and your worldview is expressed through the words that you use and the concepts that are affiliated with those. For example, since we're using the Cheyenne language, the word for God or creator in Cheyenne is Maheo, M-A'-H-E-O. And there might be an apostrophe O there, I can never remember, but it's Maheo and Maheo. And so in the Cheyenne language, an elder who sadly has passed away about 2 years ago to COVID, explained to me once. He said the word for like sacred or holy is Mahayano. I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, Mahayano. But anyway, but he said it also applied to power as well. So power, holy, sacred is Mahayano. Power, holy, sacred, spiritual, Mahayano. So when you think about power, what is power? Like in our Western minds, we think power is authority, power is electricity, power is natural, tornadoes and natural phenomenon. Those are all powerful things. But we include in that definition authority. The power is, somebody's governing ability to be in charge of you or to direct your life. But in their mindset, they don't affiliate it the same way. Power to them is the same as holy, sacred, spiritual, holy, sacred, spiritual. And the word is Mahayana, which means it is of God. In their worldview, all power, all real power, true power, comes from God, comes from the Creator. And it is no differentiation in their mindset between that and the sacred and the holy, and the sacred and the holy in that. They don't have the same thoughts that we do about authority and how that can be a power. Like I have the power, quote unquote, to do something. So that outlook on how you see the world is lost when you lose those words, when you forget those words, when you lose the connection of what those words mean. That's fundamentally intrinsic to who they are as a culture, that they see the world in that way. When you see, for example, I'll use the word oyate in the Lakota language. So a lot of times you'll hear people in the Lakota language and they'll pray and they'll say something about, the Wambli oyate or the Tatanka oyate or, what have you. Or the Shokawakan oyate, so that's eagle, eagle, buffalo, or Tatanka, eagle, buffalo, and horse. So they had those words. The eagle nation, the horse nation, the buffalo nation. But the word nation is the same word they apply to themselves. Lakota oyate, or the Lakota nation, or the Lakota people. Or they'll apply it to any other governing body. And so they are, in their worldview, seeing the animals, the horses, the buffalo, the eagles, as being like a nation unto themselves. Every bit is equal to we as human beings and our different nations. That's a worldview that's intrinsic to their culture that's lost when you start to forget what those words mean. And that's fundamentally who they are. So then they cease to really be who they are without those philosophies, I think. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. I want to take one step further and to move the language into the divine realm. there are 5 native languages that have been approved for the
Yeah.
mass. And we're actually working on the 6th one. That's indigenous Hawaiian language. But I
Right.
think when you pray, especially if you pray in your local language, that opens up your window to the divine in much real way, much safer way in terms of the heart and the senses, especially being part of that culture. But could you talk about how we use language in terms of speaking of the divine, not just for liturgy, but
Yeah.
prayer life?
You know, I had an older man I used to know. He passed away, unfortunately, but he used to joke. He was a Cheyenne man. He used to say, "Maheo, don't speak English." And obviously, he was being facetious when he said that. But his point was to say, we were given this language. It's a sacred language. We were given this language for a reason. That's because that's the language that we're meant to use, and we're meant to pray to the Creator in that way. And we really, I think, bear witness to the ability to preach Christ to all nations when you have all nations and all languages and all tongues praying to God in those languages. But beyond that, there's an interesting thing about the way they view the Creator as expressed in their language that is different than when we use certain English words. For example, sticking with the Lakota, for a minute, the Lakota refer to God in 2 ways that I'm familiar with. One is Tonkashila, which is their word for grandfather. So right there, you have the people who had not encountered Christ until Europeans came, an understanding that God is, number one, monotheistic. He is a singular creator. And number 2, that he has a familial relationship with you, and then it's a paternal relationship. So that you have a paternal familial relationship with a singular monotheistic creator is indicated in your use of the word Takashila, which means grandfather, and it's the same word you would use for your biological grandfather. But then the other word, the more technical word, or I should say more official word, I guess, for God or creator, is Wakan Tonka. Wakan, in their language, means sacred or holy, and then Tonka. So I read a really great interview with the late Frank Foolscrow, who was a nephew to Nicholas Blackout. Frank Foolscrow, who was a ceremonial man, or a Wishasha Wakan, a holy man amongst the Pine Ridge Oglala Lakotas. He was also a practicing Catholic, and he very adamantly said in one of his last interviews that to this day, he said, I go to Holy Mass at least twice a month, and I receive Holy Communion, and my wife and I are both Catholic, even though we continue to follow our spiritual ways, our Lakota ways, because we believe that they complement each other. But he was a practicing Catholic to the day he died. And he said this in his interview. He was talking about Wakan Tonka and what it means. And he said, more or less, okay, so Wakan is holy or sacred. So he said, more or less, Wakan Tonka is saying, biggest, holiest, the biggest, most holiest, biggest, holiest thing that could ever possibly be, that is the biggest above all imagination and the holiest above all imagination, and they're intertwined in that. Their bigness is akin to the holiness, and the holiness is akin to the biggest, and it's the biggest, most holiest, biggest thing that could ever possibly be. And immediately I started thinking of Saint Anselm and his, God is that than which nothing greater can be thought. But the word that came to my mind that best describes what Wakan Tonka means in the Lakota mentality, omnipotente. Mm-hmm. Omnipotent, above all potential. That's their worldview. That's the word they have for creator, omnipotent. Wakan Tonka. But they already knew that. They didn't need us to tell them that. And then the fact that you additionally refer to him as you would refer to your grandfather, that's a relationship that they have that's expressed through their culture and the way they view God creator. That is fundamental to who they are. And I think it is more from the heart and more of an authentic expression when you pray, grandfather, we beseech you, take pity on us. That's from the heart. It's more than just, oh Lord, have mercy on us. I mean, it's from the heart. It's that cultural expression. In the Cheyenne way, praying, well, like another example of the fundamental link between language and prayer and cultural worldview is a lot of times when you go into a sweat lodge, like for Lakota people, when you go into a sweat lodge or when you come out, or a lot of times when you in your prayers, a lot of times you'll say, you know, Matako Yayasan, which means it's you can look at it two ways. It means we are all related. Everything is related, and they include animals and vegetables and minerals in that. But the other way of looking at it is to say, all my relatives, you are all my relatives. And they begin and they end, they begin a lot of prayers and ceremonies, and they end a lot of prayers and ceremonies saying that, you know, we are all related, we are all relatives. And that's who we're praying to. You know, there's certain languages or certain songs and chants and things that they have, like certain Sundance songs where they're saying, you know, God, creator, you know, my people are suffering. This is why I'm doing this. That's all intrinsic in the language, but it's something that is expressed both unique to the culture, but also I think more fundamental. It's more part of who they are to express it in that way. Not so much to say that the words are better or more powerful, but just to say that it's more of an expression of their identity to say it in that way. And it goes back to preserving Native identity. Who you are as a Native person is not just that you're a brown white person or a brown person that speaks English and acts like English people or English speaking people. It's fundamental to who you are and your worldview, the way you see things, the way you understand things, and the way you express yourself from the core of your being. Who you are, your identity is expressed through language. A lot of the time too, though, a lot of the problems that we have, I think, is a lack of understanding on the part of the clergy that goes into Native communities of anything to do with historical trauma, with the culture, with the language, with any of it. And certainly there are certain ideas that many people have, especially in the seminary, where we're pretty gung-ho about the brand. And we want to make sure that everybody knows loud and clear that we're the only brand in town that's going to get you anywhere. And they're so heavy-handed in forcing that point that they forget that, you know, Catholic means universal. You know, it means universal. It encompasses all languages, all cultures, all colors of people. And we're supposed to be growing together, not necessarily trying to bring out this Eurocentric template to say, conform to this or else you're going to hell or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's a difference between being ministered to and being ministered with.
Right.
With the people and journeying with them.
Right.
They're journeying with us.
It's like, I'm not doing this for you. You know, we're growing in holiness together.
Yes.
As opposed to me telling you how you should live your life. But don't look at me, though. I can do whatever I want. You know, it's do what I say, not what I do. And that's not right. That's clericalism among a lot of other things that it's, you know, that it is. But
yeah, and it's very destructive. It's kind of why we're in the mess we went with the boarding school.
Absolutely.